Welcome, folks. My name is Tim Russell. I'm the president of Hyperpreterism Honorary Doctorates and Other Funny Stuff Research Institute in Ardmore, Alabama. And today I'm going to do a short little clip to show you why I stay on this Challenge of Christ of Don K. Preston's. He calls it the Challenge of Christ. It's not. It's not a challenge of Christ. He didn't challenge us. He's God. he we either believe him or we don't. And Don is obsessed with this debate. He's going to have a Richard Carrier. And personally, folks, I believe Don is on his way to being a full-blown atheist, if he's not already. Preston is obsessed with the Israel-only people because they take his doctrine, his hyperpreterist doctrine, to one of its logical conclusions, which is Israel only. The hyperpreterists talk about audience relevance all the time, and it was written to them, not us. It wasn't written to us. Everything was going to come to a climax in the first century. We're hoping, our hope is in a resurrection. Our hope is heaven. Our hope is in eternity with God in an immortal body, a body that never dies. The hyperpreterists claim all was fulfilled in AD 70. The resurrection, the judgment, the new heaven, new earth, the destruction of old heaven and old earth. That was all fulfilled in AD 70. And that's where the Israel only people have took it. If it was all written to them and nobody else, to that generation, and what Preston claims is the only thing Paul taught was was the law and the prophets. They say, well, Paul, it all applies to Israel. And the Gentile nations at that time were those who had been scattered abroad, like Peter had written to. And so anyway, it's a whole big study in that, and I'm just giving I don't know what I'm giving. The thing is, Israel only is a new doctrine that sprang up out of Don K. Preston and his doctrine that he got from Max King, which began in the 60s and 70s. And it's just nonsense. But I'm going to do a little clip here to show you why that challenge of Christ of his, that's the Don will go over a lot of stuff. He went over the Olivet Discourse. It took him years to get through with it, but it's still the same thing that he teaches. He'll change it to we're going to study the feast days. And he teaches the same thing. No matter what topic he calls it, it's still the same thing he's teaching. He does not tell anyone that the gospel is the good news. It's not eschatology all the time. The gospel is the good news. The world needs a savior. Good news is we have one. And Don K. Preston that was all written to the first century people. But let me play this clip. And he's bragging about this Richard Carrier. Preston has built that man up to a god. He's a godlike status. That way, Don K. Preston, when he declares victory, and he will, he's never admitted, I lost that debate, but he's going to declare victory over an atheist. Think of it, folks. If Christians spent their time debating, not trying to convert, not trying to persuade, not trying to lead people to Christ, but just debate. Let's debate. That's all these hyperpreterists, that's all they do is debate. They debate. But this is, here, let me show you why this is the topic, because this applies to dispensationalists, the amillennialists like I am. It applies to everybody. If you're not one of them, you're somebody else. And he says this is to all futurists. And Well, more power to you, Don. You pump yourself up and, bloviate with your arrogance. Call yourself doctor when you're not. Go ahead. But I'm here, and I have what, two or three listeners, three or four that agree with me, and I've been told thank you for doing some of these videos. Not every one of them, but every once in a while I get a hey, I appreciate you doing that. But I mean, this is, folks, I want you to listen to them. This is why I do this Challenge of Christ stuff.
If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you could never, ever contemplate the possibility that Jesus lied or failed. And that precisely what Dr. Carrier believes.
Right. And I want to show you what Don K. Preston believes, and it's the same thing. I'll prove it, right? I'm fixing to prove it.
So don't miss this debate. This is an incredible opportunity for the truth to confront error.
It would be if Don knew the truth, but he doesn't. And he agrees with, well, let me play it. I'll show you. I get too excited.
And I want to say this, and I'll say this kindly and with respect to all my futurist friends. No futurist eschatology can defend the challenge of Christ against attacks such as that which will be leveled by Dr. Carrier. No futurist view can answer the challenge of Christ, which was, if I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me. If Jesus didn't come in judgment at the end of the age, at the time of the resurrection, in the first century, and in the events of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, if he didn't, then he lied or he failed.
That's what I wanted you to hear, folks. So he agrees with, I'm going to back it up and play it again. If Jesus didn't come and the resurrection didn't occur, that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 15, if that didn't occur in AD 70, if the new heaven and new earth didn't come, if the creation had not been destroyed in AD 70, all things fulfilled in AD 70, Jesus lied. That's the hyper-preterist doctrine in a nutshell. Just think of 2,000 years of Christendom. All of a sudden, Max King in the late 60s come on, hey, to answer these atheists, let's change the meaning of resurrection. Let's change the meaning of death. Let's change the meaning of life. Let's change the meaning of heaven and earth. Let's change the meaning of everything. That way, we can, I don't know what they plan to do with it. But, folks, we went over the Matthew 24, verse 36. When in Matthew 24, when the apostles asked him three questions, and that last question, when is the end of the age? Preston calls it the Christian age. It's not. It's the end of this carnal world, this creation that 2 Peter 3 talks about, where all the element, heaven and earth, will be destroyed, melt with a fervent heat. All things will be done away with. That's the end of the age. That's the last age. That's it. Then the resurrection and judgment. Preston claims, well, no, it means heaven and earth means Jerusalem and the temple and the law. The elements are the ordinances of the law. Just ridiculous nonsense. But I want you to listen to him. Let me make sure I get it at the right spot. Listen to what he says, talking about none of us can argue the challenge of Christ. None of us can refute it. He's full of it. I've got a bunch of videos I've proved that he still does not quote John 10:37 where he got this from. I've shown y'all, I've got plenty of videos proving that he will not quote Jesus accurately. Jesus says in John 10:37, if I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do, Jesus got some ifs in there. Let's go to it. And I want to show, I like to use a New King James. But I want to show you what Jesus said. And we studied on why he said this. The Jews were doing the works of their father, the devil. Jesus says, I do the works of my Father, and you do not believe me anyway. If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do, though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him. Jesus proved himself, folks. It says in John 20, verse 30, that all those things he did, he proved, was to prove himself. And in what Preston claims, he said, if I do not do the works my Father has given me, those works, Jesus said he fulfilled in John 17:4. I have finished the work which you have given me to do. Don will not go over John 17:4, and he will not go over John 20, verse 30. Well, you need to go with the verses around it too to make sure you got it in proper context. Don doesn't know the context of John 10:37 because he's not read the book of John. He's not. And we read the book of John to make sure everybody understood the context of one verse. But I want you to listen to this again.
Judgment. At the end of the age, at the time of the resurrection, in the first century, and in the events of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. If he didn't, then he lied or he failed.
That's hyperpreterism in a nutshell. And he says nobody can argue it. No amillennialist, no dispensationalist, which I don't agree with the dispensationalists anymore, and I agree with Don K. Preston. But the point is, everybody is wrong except him. Even the Bible itself is wrong except Don K. Preston. Because, folks, he has to twist the scriptures to build a doctrine like this challenge of Christ. As I've pointed out for years now, he does not read the book, the verse. He changes the verse. If he would look at it this way, he went over the Olivet Discourse, that chapter. He went over it for about 4 years, or more, or longer. I'm not sure. Well, one time I remember he went over 1 Corinthians 15 for years, and then he went over the Olivet Discourse for years without reading the chapter. This is one verse, almost 5 years now, John 10:37. He has not read it. And it goes together with the rest of the chapter, the beginning to the end. And in fact, chapter 8, 9, and 10 go together. And he plucks out that one verse and will not even read it. I mean, he will not quote Jesus correctly. That tells you how much love he has for the Lord and how much truth he has in him. Folks, he's a deceiver. Don't believe Don K. Preston for a minute. And the arrogance to say, this, if you can't debate this atheist, then, good grief. We don't debate atheists. I couldn't care less what Richard Carrier says about Jesus because he's had his opportunity like the rest of us. We've all had the opportunity that have studied the scriptures and listened to the gospel. We either accept it or reject it. We don't need proof. We don't need to go look at Jesus' miracle. We don't need to go look at the ruins of Jerusalem and the temple and say, oh, okay, he did do what he says he was going to do. It's ridiculous. And that is one phrase that Don has used for 10:37. Jesus says, if I do not do what I say I'm going to do, no, he doesn't say that either, Don. And he doesn't say what you went on for years about with, claiming he said, do not believe me for my words' sake, believe me for my works. Jesus didn't say that either and didn't mean that. That's completely out of context. You twist the scriptures to suit you. Jesus did not give us a challenge. He gave us an invitation. If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do, though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know the Father is in me and I in him. Okay, that's what the apostles had to do too. They proved Jesus was the Son of God through the works they did, the gospel they preached. People either believe it or reject it. We have not seen, I know there's people out there today that still believes in laying on of hands type miracles, those sign gifts. I don't believe them, but there's people that do. But we do not need to see one sign. We do not need to see one person raised from the dead, one person's limbs be restored. We don't need to see one blind person miraculously healed by the laying on of hands, or one cripple to stand up and go to walking. We do not need that to believe Jesus is the Son of God, and through him we can have eternal life. John chapter 20, verse 30, 29, 30 tells us that blessed are those, Thomas, he said, Thomas, you have seen and believed. Blessed are those who will not see yet believe. That's us, Preston. We don't need to go to the ruins of Jerusalem. We some of us raised in the church, some of us not. We hear the gospel. We either believe it or not. It's up to us. It's not a challenge. It's an invitation. You want to escape this sinful, deadly world? Here's the good news. There's a way out. There's a way of escape. Here's how you can have eternal life with the Lord. And you've got it all so twisted up. You're leading people away from Christ, not towards Christ. And folks, one more thing. Remember, Preston, when Sam Frost was one of them, one of those hyper preterists. Now he's got out of that movement, thankfully, but he wrote a book. I've got it on my website. It's a link to his book. He used to be a preterist. Here's how he got out of it, or here's why he got it. I forget the name of the book, but it's on my website. But he said, him and Don, others, their plan is to, which Don carries his plan out with other hyper-preterists, put men in churches around the country, sneak them in there to teach this stuff in Sunday school classes and youth classes and all that. Teach this, put them in there. Folks, I want to read this. The gospel is not something you have to sneak in. You preach it. You don't have to go in the back door. Well, if you do, you're not preaching the gospel. If you have to sneak it in, you're not preaching the gospel. Peter went over this in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 1. But there were many false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words for a long time. Their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. Folks, if you got to sneak something in, it's not the gospel, and you need to cut that out. You need to make sure you're watching what's being taught to the little ones and to the teenagers and to the auditorium classes and whatever kind of class system you got set up, Bible studies. you got to make sure you watch for this stuff because they've sending John Watson up before he blocked me off his Facebook page. He was wanting to send somebody down here to Ardmore Church of Christ to speak to. I said, well, you got to go through the elders. But I can tell you now, they're not going to let you get up there and teach a false doctrine. They're not going to. And but you know, the elders, how to get in communication with them is on the Ardmore Church of Christ website. We don't hide from anybody. One of their John Watson's disciples, he was talking about. I was afraid to tell him who I said. I'm open here. I live here. I'm in Ardmore, Alabama. Here's where I assemble with the church. And I said, well, where do you assemble with? He wouldn't tell me. You know, they want to do it in secret. They want to do everything in secret. And, you know, that's ridiculous, folks. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a class teacher. I do my own thing if I'm doing something wrong, the elders of the church tell me, hey, that you're teaching a false thing on your website. I hadn't had anybody to come to me yet. But I'm doing it openly. Whatever I put on YouTube, on my website, on my Facebook page, I'm open. I'm not hiding anything. I'm too old for that. I'm almost 65 years old. Why would I want to hide? I don't want to be talked down to like a child, and I'm not going to treat others like a child unless that's what they are asking for. You know, maybe that's not the best Christian attitude, but you know, I am who I am, and I work on problems. But this is if you ever seen a heresy, this is it. When a man will sit there and tell you, if all things weren't fulfilled in AD 70 under Titus, not under Jesus, under Titus and the Roman army, he'll say, well, God used armies in the Old Testament. Yes, he did. And he used the Romans to judge the nation and knock down that temple so they would know, look, this folks, the temple was the church before AD 70. That temple made by hands was no longer the temple of God. It was already obsolete. But Jesus told them all of these stones will be knocked down, all of them. And they were. That was a judgment, no doubt. But that wasn't Matthew 24:36, the day that no man knows. That's when all the dead, all in the graves, will hear his voice, both good and evil. Everybody will be resurrected, and they will have either be on the right or the left. We either go to heaven or we'll go to hell. But, again, Preston claims that was all fulfilled in AD 70, the death and Hades sin, everything, all of that. Satan, they believe Satan has been done away with, and most of them teach, well, Satan was actually the high priest. Nothing in the scriptures teach that Satan was the high priest. Nothing. You have to do a lot of twisting, like Don K. Preston does, John 10:37. You have to twist it into knots to get what he gets out of it. Satan was not the high priest. He might have tempted the high priest, and the high priest might have followed Satan more than he followed God, but he was not Satan. I want to hear just a little bit more, see if there's anything other relevance in there I wanted to put, but I want to show you he's still bragging about, I'm going to debate the scholar of scholars, Richard Carrier. Richard Carrier, folks, look him up. He's a rabble rouser, smart aleck, whatever name you want to call a highly educated knucklehead atheist. That's Richard Carrier. And Don K. Preston but like I said, he's got to build him up way up on the tower so he can claim victory and see how I knocked him down. Don can't even defeat me, little old me. I've proven him wrong on this challenge of Christ. he won't admit it, but I have. I've used the scriptures to prove he don't know what he's talking about in my other videos. On this one, I'm just ranting, but I have proven he don't know what he's talking about. Let's hear just a little bit more.
And I know futurists make all sorts of excuses. They make all sorts of attempts to deflect that charge. None of them work.
Mine does. Mine did. I've knocked your doctrine out of the park with just simple Bible reading. Just let the Bible do it. Reading what it actually says and not what you say it does. I've proved you wrong. There is no such thing as the challenge of Christ. It's the challenge of Don K. Preston's imagination, is what it is.
Okay. And again, I say that with all due respect. I'm not trying to be harsh, not trying to be mean spirited.
He says that, folks, and then you say, but you're an idiot. He's one of the most mean-spirited people I know, and other than me. And I mean, he is. He just doesn't. If you can call Jesus a 5'5" Jewish man riding on clouds, if you can be that nonchalant about it, you're a mean-spirited dude. And yes, Don, nearly all futurists can prove you wrong. Your challenge of Christ is nonsense. If they will just read it, study it. Okay, what does it say? And folks, that's why I've been on this. It is so simple, and yet it's like nobody cares. But I'm telling you, Don has an effect on people, and he got 8,000 subscribers. But I believe most of those are bots, and a lot of them are like me. His viewership has fallen off quite a bit, but I mean, we can't let up on something like this. I don't. Maybe I'm obsessed with it too much, but we can't let this go. When they come out there and say we're going to do this and that, they got to be stopped. And this is my way of stopping him, is doing videos to point out his false teaching. Well, that's what I wanted to say today, folks. But please read the book of John. Read chapter 8, 9, and 10, and look at it. What he says, Jesus is saying, if I do not come in AD 70 and end all things, do not believe me. Wagging his finger when he says, no, that ain't what Jesus was saying. Jesus proved himself before AD 70. John 17:4 and John 20 both prove. John 20 verse 30 prove Don K. Preston is false, because Jesus he proved who he was and finished the work his Father gave him to do. Well, that's all I got to say, and thank you for listening. But this is why I'm on this challenge of Christ, and I'm not going to get off till he does.